He thought his twin daughters were lost forever, abandoned to a cold and cruel world. But 3 years later, on a lonely stretch of road, he found them, singing softly in the quiet wilderness. What he discovered that day didn't just break his heart. It tore apart everything he thought he knew about hope and survival. Let us know in the comments where you're watching this story from, and if you want more tales like this, don't forget to subscribe. Now, settle in and listen close. This is a story of loss, courage, and a bond stronger than silence itself. It started with the wind. Dry, biting wind that scraped across my face and whispered through the cracks in the road like it knew my name. The sky had turned the color of old tin, and the road itself felt more like memory than stone, fading, forgotten, and stubbornly refusing to disappear. I'd been riding since dawn, following nothing but the sound of my own breathing and the steady creak of leather under me. I wasn't looking for anything. Hell, I wasn't even sure I was heading anywhere worth finding. That's the thing about being alone long enough. Your direction stops mattering. It all becomes just forward. My horse, an old chestnut mare with more scars than sense, moved at her own pace. I let her. It wasn't like I had an appointment waiting down the road. The sun had already started dipping, throwing long shadows over dying shrubs and splintered fence posts. That was when I heard it, a sound so out of place it felt like it didn't belong to this world. At first, I thought it was the wind playing tricks, a soft, broken cry carried on a gust. But it came again, weaker this time, a sound that was more than wind, a sound of life, or at least what was left of it. I pulled the mare to a stop. The world around me went quiet, save for my own heartbeat thumping heavy in my ears. I slid off the saddle, boots crunching on gravel as I moved toward where the sound had come from. Each step felt slower than the last, like the air itself was trying to hold me back. I stepped through brittle grass and past a rusted fence rail, half expecting to find nothing. But there she was, tied to a splintered post, head drooping to her chest, hair tangled and dirty, dress torn down the side like someone had ripped it in anger. Blood had dried on her temple, the color of old rust. And at her feet, wrapped in a worn-out horse blanket that smelled of mildew and fear, were 2 newborns. They couldn't have been more than a day or 2 old, faces red and scrunched, tiny hands grasping at nothing. One of them let out another weak cry, the sound so soft it felt like it might blow away if the wind picked up. I remember staring at them, feeling something in my chest twist so hard it hurt. I hadn't spoken to another soul in weeks, maybe longer. And yet, in that moment, words found their way out. "God damn," I whispered under my breath, the words tasting like dust. She didn't lift her head. Her breathing was shallow, ragged, like every inhale cost more than she could pay. I saw rope burns at her wrists, purple and raw. Someone had done this, and not long ago. The tracks were still fresh in the dirt, boot prints leading back to the road and then disappearing into nothing. Whoever left her here hadn't meant for her to see another dawn. I took my knife from my belt. The blade felt heavier than usual as I cut the ropes binding her. Her arms dropped like stones. For a heartbeat she stayed upright, then folded in on herself. I caught her before she hit the ground. She weighed next to nothing, just skin, bone, and exhaustion. Her head lolled against my chest, and for a moment her eyes fluttered open, pale, unfocused, but alive. At my feet, the babies squirmed weakly in the blanket. My mare pawed the ground behind me, impatient, sensing something she couldn't name. The wind picked up, carrying with it the smell of coming snow. I had a choice: walk away, leave them to the cold like the world clearly wanted me to, or take them with me, knowing full well it might ruin whatever quiet life I'd carved out for myself. I lifted the babies first, one by one, tucking them against my chest under my coat to share what little warmth I had. Their bodies were so small, it felt like holding something that might vanish if I breathed too hard. Then I gathered the woman in my arms. Her head fell back, exposing the bruise that bloomed along her jaw. I tried not to look too closely. There'd be time to see later. The mare shifted under the weight as I settled her across the saddle, then slung the babies against my chest in the old army blanket I kept for cold nights. I led the horse by the reins, boots sinking into dirt that was already starting to freeze. The road ahead bent out of sight between dead trees and rock. I hadn't planned on going back. But plans don't mean much when you find 3 hearts still beating where none should be. The cabin was half a day's walk. An old trapper's place I'd fixed up over the years. 1 room, a stove, a cot, and enough would stacked against the north wall to see me through the season. It wasn't much, but it was something. And sometimes, something is enough. Snowflakes began to fall before we reached the ridge, wide, slow-moving flakes that clung to my coat and melted on my cheeks. The woman never woke. Once she shifted in the saddle, a low sound slipping from cracked lips, but her eyes stayed closed. The babies were quieter now, the cold weighing on them like it did on me. I walked faster, every step sinking into mud that was turning to ice. When the cabin came into view, relief hit me so hard my legs almost buckled. Smoke curled from the chimney, thin and white. I'd left the fire banked before I left that morning, and by some small grace it had kept smouldering. Inside, the warmth was a punch to the lungs. I laid the woman down on my cot, her breathing shallow but steady. Then I unwrapped the babies, setting them beside the hearth where the heat could find them. One of them whimpered, the sound like paper tearing. I found the last jar of goat's milk I had left, warmed it over the stove, and fed them drop by drop. Their tiny mouths opened and closed, eyes rolling back in relief. When they finally slept, I let myself breathe. The woman still hadn't stirred. I covered her with a quilt patched from old shirts, tucking it under her chin. Standing there, I felt the weight of what I'd done settle into my bones. I'd changed something today, something I couldn't take back. I didn't know her name, didn't know the babies' names either. But they were here now, in my space, breathing my air under my watch. Outside, the snow kept falling, burying tracks and sins alike. And inside, for the first time in longer than I could remember, it didn't feel so God-forsakenly empty. I didn't speak to her that night. Didn't speak at all. Some words are too heavy to use right away. Instead, I sat by the fire, knife in hand, cleaning mud from the blade. The snow tapped at the window like an old friend asking to come in. And as the hours crawled past, I kept watch. Because tonight, they were mine to keep safe. And come morning, I'd have to decide what came next. Morning came slow, grey light dripping in through the cracks between the shutters. I hadn't slept. Couldn't. Every time I let my eyes close, I saw her face tied to that post, eyes half open, as if life had already started to leave her. And those babies, so small it felt like the world itself might crush them if it turned too fast. She stirred first, not fully awake, but drifting somewhere between sleep and pain. Her lips moved, dry and cracked, words barely forming. I poured a tin cup of warm water and lifted her head gently. Her skin felt feverish, but not yet burning. When the water touched her lips, she tried to drink too fast, coughing, the sound ragged and hollow. But she drank, drop by drop, until her breathing evened out again. She didn't open her eyes, just whispered something I couldn't catch. Her voice was as thin as the wind outside. I set the cup aside, checked the babies where they lay near the hearth. Both were asleep, their breaths quick and shallow, hands curled into fists. One had a bruise on her cheek, small and purple, as if someone had grabbed her too roughly. The sight of it made my chest go tight, like someone had tied a rope around my ribs and pulled. I wasn't sure what to do next. Truth was, I'd never cared for anything so fragile. My life before had been simple. Hunt, fix what breaks, keep the stove burning. No mouths to feed but my own. No soft cries in the night. No need to remember gentleness. But now, every move felt deliberate, as if any sharpness in me might hurt them. I started with the fire, added more wood, stirred the embers until the warmth spread through the room. Then I cleaned out an old crate, lined it with folded shirts, and set the babies inside so they'd be near the heat. They didn't wake, but one let out a sigh so small it barely moved the air. She opened her eyes sometime around midday. At first, she looked past me, like she couldn't quite see where she was. Then her gaze settled, slow and wary, and she took me in, the stranger who'd carried her from death's edge. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. I could see the question there, heavy as a stone. Why? I didn't answer. Didn't know how to explain that even a man like me couldn't leave them there. Instead, I handed her the cup again. This time, her hands trembled as she took it, but she managed to drink without choking. She tried to sit up, winced, and settled back against the pillow. The bruises on her neck had darkened overnight, blooming into ugly colors. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, exposing more bruises along her collarbone. I forced myself not to stare. Some things a man shouldn't see uninvited. The silence between us was thick, but it wasn't cruel. More like the silence of two people standing at the edge of something neither dared name. She looked at the babies next, her eyes softening in a way that made something in me ache, as if the world itself had narrowed to those two tiny shapes wrapped in cloth. Afternoon light cut through the window, catching the dust in the air and turning it gold. I offered her bread, torn into small pieces, easier to swallow. She ate slowly, chewing like each bite reminded her she was still alive. She didn't ask where we were. Maybe she already knew it didn't matter. The cabin was nothing more than wood and stone, tucked at the edge of a pine forest nobody bothered to pass through. I'd chosen it for that reason years ago, a place where the world forgot to look. When she finished eating, she rested her head back against the cot, eyes closing. But just before sleep took her, she whispered a single word, "Why?" The word hung there, sharp and soft all at once. I didn't have an answer, but after a moment I said the only thing that felt true. Because someone should. She didn't reply, but something in her shoulders eased, like a knot coming undone. That night, the snow came heavier, thick flakes that melted on the window and ran in slow rivers down the glass. I kept the fire high, feeding it until the logs hissed and spat sparks into the dark. The babies woke, hungry cries slicing through the quiet. I warmed more milk, feeding them one after the other, their tiny mouths working greedily. She woke, watched me from the cot. Her eyes were clearer now, though rimmed with exhaustion. She didn't speak, just watched, and I let her. There was no shame in it, no embarrassment. Only two people learning the shape of each other's presence. When the babies slept again, I checked the door latch, made sure it was secure. The snow made the world smaller, closer. The sound of the wind pressing against the walls felt almost like a heartbeat. Before dawn, I stepped outside. The cold bit deep, turning breath to smoke. The trees stood heavy with white, branches bending under the weight. For a moment, the world felt untouched, as if no violence had ever happened here. Inside, I heard the creak of the cot as she shifted, maybe looking for me. The thought of it, that someone might look for me, even silently, felt strange and unfamiliar. When I came back in, she was sitting up, blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The babies stirred beside her. She traced a finger along one baby's cheek, careful and slow. Her face softened, a quiet sadness there that words couldn't reach. I busied myself with chores, chopping wood, checking the roof for leaks, melting snow for water. All the while her gaze followed me, not questioning, just noticing. That evening I set a tin plate with bread and dried meat near her. She took it with a nod, still silent. After she ate, she spoke, voice hoarse but stronger. "I don't know your name." For a moment I hesitated, then answered, simple and plain, "Elias." She held my eyes when she spoke next. "Thank you, Elias." It shouldn't have mattered, just 2 words. But hearing them, hearing my name from her lips, landed somewhere deep, in a place I thought long dead. We didn't speak more that night. The fire burned low. The babies slept. And for the first time in what felt like years, I didn't feel the weight of my own solitude pressing so hard on my chest. Outside, the snow kept falling. But inside, the quiet had changed. It wasn't emptiness anymore. It felt like waiting, like something new might yet grow from the ashes of what we'd both lost. The days settled into a quiet rhythm. Mornings began with smoke curling from the chimney, snow dripping from the eaves, and the sound of the babies stirring in their crate by the hearth. I'd rise first, always before the light fully reached the window. Stoke the fire, boil water, check the traps I'd set days before. Sometimes I'd come back with nothing but wet boots and cold bones, but it felt worth doing, if only to remind myself the world still held movement beyond these 4 walls. She moved slower, her body still worn thin by hunger and bruises. But each day she managed a little more. Folding cloth, rocking the babies. Once I caught her humming something soft under her breath, a tune so fragile it felt like it might break if I breathed too loud. We didn't speak much. Words felt like heavy stones neither of us wanted to carry. Instead, we spoke in small ways. A cup of water left at her bedside before dawn. Bread softened in milk for her to eat without pain. Her glances toward the door when I returned from outside. Silent questions that asked, "Are you hurt? Did anyone follow you?" And the smallest lift of my chin in answer, "No, all's clear." At night, when the wind howled against the shutters, I'd sit near the fire with my back to the door. The knife always within reach, not out of habit, but because the thought of something coming for them felt sharper than anything I'd faced before. It was strange. I'd lived so long with nothing but my own skin to lose. Now, in the stillness of the cabin, I realized how heavy caring for someone could feel. Heavy, but not unwelcome. Her strength returned slowly. By the 5th dawn, she could rise on her own, though each movement was measured and careful. I offered her my coat when she stepped outside for the first time, the snow crunching under her bare feet. She didn't refuse it, just pulled it around her shoulders, eyes scanning the tree-line like someone half expecting ghosts. The babies, twin girls with hair as dark as the soot on the hearth, grew louder each day. One had a stubborn way of crying until she was held. The other watched the world with quiet, blinking eyes, as if she were already studying it. I didn't know their names. Neither did she, it seemed. Once I caught her looking at them, lips parted like she meant to speak, but no sound came, as if naming them might mean admitting they were real, that they might be lost again. The days blurred, each marked only by the chores that kept the cold at bay. Chopping wood until my hands blistered, fetching water from the creek where ice clung to the banks, patching the holes in the roof where wind slipped in like a whisper. Each task felt different now, as if every split log and mended seam mattered more because someone else might need it. One night, as the fire burned low, she finally spoke of before. Her voice was quiet, her eyes fixed not on me, but on the flames. "They left me there to die," she said. "Said I'd shamed the family, birthing girls instead of a son." Her words landed heavy in the silence. I didn't interrupt. Just listened, the way you listen to distant thunder. "My husband died before they were born," she continued, "and with no man to claim them, they said there was nothing worth keeping." She didn't cry. Instead, her voice turned flat, as if she'd told the story so many times in her own head it had worn smooth. "They tied me to that post," she whispered. "Told me the cold would do the rest." My hands clenched around the tin cup I held, the metal biting into my skin. There was nothing to say that would make it less true. Instead, I said what little I could. "They were wrong," I murmured. For the first time, she looked at me fully. The firelight caught the bruises that still marked her skin, but also something softer behind her gaze. Not forgiveness. There was nothing for me to be forgiven, but something like surprise that I'd bothered to answer at all. The snow fell through the night, layering the world in silence. In that quiet, I thought of the road I'd found her on. How narrow and forgotten it had been, as if fate itself had hidden her there. And how, somehow, I'd found her anyway. Dawn crept in slow, spilling pale light across the cabin floor. She rose before me that day, the babies already cradled in her arms, whispering something to them too soft for me to hear. It felt wrong to listen, like overhearing a prayer. She asked for help to fetch water. Her voice trembled when she asked, but it was the first time she'd asked me for anything. I nodded, handed her the bucket. Outside, the world was still frozen, but the sky held a hint of blue, the first in days. As she bent to fill the bucket, she paused, eyes fixed on the snow-covered path leading away from the cabin. "Do you think they'll come?" she asked. I followed her gaze, saw nothing but pines and white silence. But I heard what lay beneath the question: fear, hope, and the faintest thread of belief that maybe someone might stand between her and whatever waited out there. "They might," I admitted, "but not today." She nodded, the breath she'd held slipping from her chest in a thin cloud. Inside, the babies had begun to fuss, their cries muffled by the walls. She moved to go to them, but paused beside me. "I don't know what I'd do," she whispered, "if they came." "You won't have to find out," I said, and I meant it, though I'd never promised anyone anything before. Back inside, the cabin felt warmer. She sat by the hearth, feeding the girls while I worked near the window, carving small shapes from leftover pine. A bird at first, then a small fox, then another I never finished. She watched, never asking why. But sometimes, when she thought I wasn't looking, I'd catch her eyes on my hands, following the shape of what they made. That night, the wind rose, whistling through the cracks in the boards. But inside, the fire burned steady, and for the first time since I'd carried her from that road, she fell asleep without startling awake. Her breathing even, the babies curled against her side, the rise and fall of 3 chests in quiet rhythm. I sat near the door, blade across my knee, eyes on the window. Outside, the snow hid every path, every track, but I knew well enough that the past could still find a way through. Yet for now, it hadn't, and as the firelight danced across her face and the small, fragile shapes beside her, I found myself hoping, foolishly, stubbornly, that maybe it never would. Winter held the land in its cold fist longer than usual that year. Days passed in shades of grey, the sky heavy with unfallen snow, the air sharp enough to cut breath in two. Inside the cabin, life settled into something close to routine, though nothing about it felt ordinary. Most mornings began in the hush before dawn, when the world seemed to hold its breath. She'd wake before the babies, sit near the window, and watch the sky lighten behind the pines. I'd watch her sometimes, quiet and unnoticed, seeing how the softness returned to her face when she thought no one was looking. In those moments, the bruises seemed to fade, replaced by something quieter. Not quite peace, but the hope of it. The babies grew stronger. Their cries turned from weak whimpers to full-throated protests whenever hunger came. She nursed them when she could, though it pained her, and when she couldn't, I'd warm goat's milk in small jars. I'd never imagined myself holding something so tiny, but over time my hands learned their shape, the gentle way to lift them without fear. One morning, as she watched me feed them, she smiled, just barely, like a memory trying to return. That smile stayed with me longer than the warmth of the fire. She spoke a little more each day. Short sentences at first, careful and weighted, as if each word cost something precious. Once, as she folded a blanket, she told me about the house where she'd grown up. A single room, dirt floor, her father's voice always louder than the wind. Another time, she mentioned a locket she'd worn as a girl, lost years ago. I never asked for details. I only listened, holding the shape of her words like fragile glass. We named the babies late one evening, when the snow fell so heavy it felt like the world beyond the cabin had disappeared. She sat by the hearth, the twins in her lap, and spoke their names softly. Mara for the quieter one, Ellen for the one who never stopped fighting. Names that belonged to no man's family, only to them. When she said them aloud, something shifted in the room, as if the act of naming had claimed a piece of the world for ourselves. I carved the names into 2 small wooden discs and tied them to the baby's cloths. She ran her fingers over the letters, eyes wet but no tears fell. Outside, the snow buried every path, every track that might have led anyone here. But we both knew snow couldn't hide us forever. Some nights, I'd catch her standing by the window, staring into the darkness beyond the glass. Her breath fogged the pane, her reflection faint and ghostly. I didn't ask what she saw out there. I already knew. Memories that refused to stay buried, faces that haunted the edges of sleep. One night, she spoke of them at last, the men who'd left her tied to die. Her husband's brother, Matthew, and 2 cousins. Rough men, quick with drink and quicker with anger. When her husband died, she said, they saw her as nothing more than a mouth to feed, a burden that couldn't carry sons. The words came out flat, without tears, as if they'd been burned dry long ago. I thought if I could just stay quiet, she whispered, maybe they'd forget I was there. But silence doesn't save you, I answered, softer than I meant to. She looked at me, the firelight reflected in her eyes. No, it doesn't. After that night, something between us settled. Not spoken, not named, but real, like the quiet understanding between 2 survivors who've stopped asking why. As winter wore on, my days filled with small tasks, mending the roof, patching gaps where wind slipped in, checking the traps set deep in the woods. Once I came back with a fresh hare, and she cooked it into a thin stew that tasted of salt and smoke. The babies slept longer after a good meal, and the sight of them resting, cheeks flushed with warmth, felt like proof we'd done something right. Sometimes, while I worked by the window, she'd hum under her breath, the same tune each time, though I never asked its name. And sometimes, when the babies fussed late at night, I'd pace the floor with Mara in my arms, her small heartbeat against my chest reminding me that the world held softer things than solitude. One afternoon, as the snow began to thaw, she stepped outside without asking. The sun was pale but warm enough to melt a thin crust from the drifts. She stood there, coat too large around her shoulders, face turned toward the sky. Her breath caught, and for a moment she closed her eyes, as if remembering something better. When she opened them, she caught me watching. Instead of turning away, she held my gaze. "It feels like the world's waking up," she said. I nodded, though I wasn't sure if I believed it yet. But her saying it made it seem possible. Later that day, we worked side by side to gather fallen branches from the tree-line. Her steps were still cautious, but stronger now. Once, she stumbled on a hidden root, and I caught her arm before she fell. She didn't pull away. Instead, she stood there, breathing hard, her hand gripping my sleeve. For a heartbeat, the world felt very small, just snow, breath, and the warmth of her fingers on my arm. She let go first, a faint flush on her cheeks, but said nothing. Neither did I. As night came, we brought the wood inside, stacked it near the hearth. The babies slept, cheeks warm against the quilt. She watched them, her expression softer than I'd ever seen, and in the quiet, she spoke so low I almost missed it. "Thank you," she whispered. Not for saving her, though maybe that too, but for this, warmth, safety, the chance to see another dawn. I wanted to answer, but words felt too small. Instead, I placed another log on the fire, the flames rising higher, and let the silence speak for me. Outside, the snow kept falling, but inside, something else had begun to grow, a fragile thing, unnamed, but stronger each day. And though I'd never say it aloud, I'd begun to hope, quietly, stubbornly, that maybe it would survive the thaw. As winter loosened its grip, the land began to reveal itself again. Snow melted into patches of dark earth, rivers cracked and ran free, and the trees stood bare but waiting. Inside the cabin, life moved forward in quiet rhythms. Feed the babies, patch the roof, mend the quilt where the edges had worn thin. Small tasks that together made something larger than survival, something that felt, at times, almost like living. She spoke more now. Her voice had a rough edge, like stone scraped smooth by water, but it held steadiness too. Sometimes she'd share small memories, a favorite ribbon lost in childhood, the smell of bread rising in an oven that no longer existed, the way her mother had brushed her hair before bed. They were fragments, but each carried weight, proof she'd lived before the road, before the rope, before the silence that nearly swallowed her whole. I never offered stories in return. Mine felt too empty, too dull, like bones picked clean. But I listened, and sometimes, when her voice trembled at the edge of something painful, I'd murmur a word or two. Not enough to fix anything, but enough to remind her I was there. One morning, I found her standing at the creek behind the cabin. Ice still clung to the banks, but water flowed fast beneath. She watched it move, her breath forming soft clouds that drifted away. When I stepped closer, she didn't startle. Instead, she spoke without turning. "It's strange," she said. "After everything, the world keeps going. Water keeps running. Birds keep flying." "It does," I said, though my voice sounded strange to my own ears, unused to speaking so many words at once. She dipped her hand into the water, hissed at the cold, but didn't pull away. "Sometimes I think it's cruel," she murmured, "that the world forgets so easily." I didn't have an answer, so I stood beside her in the hush of melting snow and let the creek speak for us both. That night I carved another small gift, a comb, rough at first, but sanded smooth until it fit the curve of her hand. I left it on the table near the hearth. At dawn, I found her holding it, thumb running over the ridges, eyes bright in the firelight. She didn't thank me out loud. Instead, she used it, drawing it gently through her hair until it lay smooth around her shoulders. It was the first time I'd seen her hair fully untangled, and the sight caught something in my chest I couldn't name. The babies grew louder with the season. Mara laughed first, a small bubbling sound that startled us both. Ellen followed days later, her laugh softer but no less sure. Their laughter changed the air in the cabin, made it lighter somehow. Even when exhaustion sat heavy on her shoulders, she would still smile at the sound, as if it reminded her that hope was more stubborn than sorrow. As the days warmed, we began to open the windows, letting in air that smelled of pine and wet earth. She stood often in the doorway, the babies in her arms, watching the road that wound unseen beyond the trees. I knew what she waited for, or rather, what she feared might come. And it did, in signs first. A set of fresh tracks near the lower trail. A broken branch that hadn't fallen by wind alone. Small things, but together enough to stir an old ache in my gut. I didn't tell her at first. Instead, I doubled the traps, checked them at dawn and dusk, kept my rifle closer to hand. But silence, I'd learned, protects nothing forever. One evening, as the babies slept, she caught my eye across the room. "You've been watching the woods more," she said. Her voice didn't accuse. It simply named what was true. "They might come," I admitted. She nodded once, eyes steady. "I know." Neither of us spoke of who they were. Names weren't needed. The memory of rope and bruises spoke loudly enough. She crossed the room then, stood beside me. Her hand, when it touched my arm, was small, but it steadied something inside me. "I won't run," she whispered. "Not again." Her words settled like a stone in quiet water, sending ripples I didn't expect. The next morning, we prepared without speaking of it as preparation. She helped patch the fence where it sagged, though her hands trembled with every nail. I gathered wood and kept it stacked closer to the door. Inside, we moved things that could break or burn easily, not out of panic, but from the cold logic of those who've lived close to loss. At night, after the babies fell asleep, we sat near the hearth. The silence between us no longer felt like distance. It felt like trust, the kind that grows, slowly and painfully, between people who've both known abandonment. One night, as the wind rattled the window shutters, she spoke without lifting her eyes from the flames. "Do you think they'll try to take the girls?" The question cut deep because I'd wondered the same. "They'll try," I said, "but they won't succeed." She swallowed hard, jaw tight. "I couldn't stop them before." "You're not alone now," I said, and for the first time, I believed my own words. She looked at me then, really looked, and something passed between us. Not love, not yet, but the raw beginning of something built on shared wounds and stubborn hope. Later that night, when the babies stirred, she rose, but I stopped her with a small gesture. I crossed the room, lifted Mora in my arms, felt the small, fierce beat of her heart. Her eyes blinked up at me, wide and dark, and for a moment the world narrowed to nothing but her warmth against my chest. Behind me, I heard her breath catch, soft, almost hidden. When I turned, she was watching, hands pressed to her mouth, eyes wet. She didn't speak. Neither did I. The silence held more than words ever could. Outside, the thaw turned streams into rivers, paths into mud. But inside, the fire burned, and the road we walked together, fragile, uncertain, felt real enough to follow, no matter what lay ahead. Spring came not in a rush, but in slow, uncertain breaths. The snow shrank back from the trees, and the ground, long hidden beneath its white burden, revealed itself in patches of wet, stubborn earth. Birds returned first, cautious, quiet, as if testing whether the land had truly softened. And for a time, it almost felt like the danger that had haunted us might melt away too. But danger, I learned, does not thaw like snow. It waits, hidden, patient. I noticed it first in the small things. Footprints near the old trap line, deeper than my boots, made by heavier men. A patch of crushed grass where someone had crouched, watching. Broken twigs high enough that no deer could have done it. I kept these signs to myself for 2 days, weighing what silence might protect, and what it might destroy. On the 3rd day, as she fed the babies near the window, I spoke. My voice felt rough in my throat. "They're close." She didn't ask who. She only closed her eyes for a moment, long enough that I saw her shoulders tense, as if bracing for a blow. Then she opened them and nodded once. "What do we do?" "We keep watch," I said. We keep the girls close. And we stay ready. That night, I stayed awake by the window, rifle across my knees, ears straining for the snap of a branch or the quiet scuff of boots on thawed earth. The fire burned low beside me, its orange glow throwing shadows that danced across the walls. She lay with the babies on the cot, but I knew she wasn't asleep. Her breathing had the restless rhythm of a heart that knows fear too well. Before dawn, she rose and crossed the room, quilt wrapped around her shoulders. She didn't speak, just sat beside me on the floor, close enough that our shoulders nearly touched. The cabin smelled of smoke and pine sap, and outside, the wind carried the scent of damp earth and distant rain. "It shouldn't be like this," she whispered. Her voice trembled, but only slightly. "Afraid every time the wind changes." "It shouldn't," I agreed. The words tasted bitter, because truth often does. She turned her face to me, shadows deepening the lines the past had carved there. "You could leave. Take the girls somewhere safer. Away from me." I shook my head. "I won't leave." "Why?" The word fell between us, heavy and sharp. I searched for an answer that felt honest. "Because I've walked too many roads alone. And because they're your daughters, and now they're mine to protect too." Her eyes shone wet in the firelight, but she didn't look away. "And me?" I swallowed hard, the question striking deeper than I'd expected. "You too," I said. "All of you." We sat like that until morning light crept across the floorboards. When the babies stirred, she rose, but before stepping away, she let her hand brush my arm, the smallest touch, yet it felt like a promise. Days passed under that quiet strain. I moved through each dawn like a man waiting for a knock that might never come but would still haunt every heartbeat. She felt it too. The babies, sensing our tension, grew restless, crying more often, refusing sleep. But we held them, rocked them, whispered to them. Our fear might reach us, but we tried not to let it touch them. One morning, as she hung damp cloths to dry by the hearth, she spoke. "Before they come, there's something you should know." I kept my gaze steady on her, though my chest tightened. "Tell me." She hesitated, breath caught between ribs. "The man I married, he wasn't always cruel. Not at first. But after the first miscarriage, something in him turned. His family blamed me, called me cursed. When the twins came, they saw them not as daughters, but as proof that curse had taken root." Her voice broke, but she continued. "When he died, his brother took control. Said girls were mouths to feed, nothing more. I begged them to let me stay. They tied me up instead." I wanted to speak, to say that none of it was her fault, that those men's cruelty belonged to them alone. But words felt too thin beside the weight of her story. So I listened. When she finished, silence stretched between us, thick with grief, regret, and something harder to name. Finally, she spoke again, softer than before. "I thought no one would ever come. Then you did. I almost kept riding," I admitted. "But something made me stop." "What?" I thought of that day, the wind cold against my face, the road behind me long and empty, and then the faintest cry, like hope refusing to die. Maybe it was the sound of them. Or maybe, I paused, voice catching, maybe it was that I was lost too. She nodded, as if understanding something unspoken. "Do you ever wonder if it's worth it? Staying, fighting. Every day," I said. "But I stay anyway." That night, after the babies slept, she sat beside me again. The fire's glow traced the curve of her cheek, the tired strength in her eyes. Neither of us spoke, but her shoulder leaned into mine, warm and real. It wasn't a confession, nor a promise. Just presence, and sometimes That's braver than either. As the season warmed, so did small moments between us. Once, while she gathered water from the creek, I watched her lift her face to the sun, eyes closed, lips parted in a quiet smile. And once, while I mended the fence, I caught her watching me, a softness in her gaze that made my hands shake on the hammer. We didn't speak of what might be building between us. Words, we both knew, could frighten delicate things into flight. But it lived in the silence, in the shared glances, the careful way we moved around each other, and the growing sense that neither of us stood entirely alone anymore. Then, one morning, I found fresh tracks again, deeper, clearer, closer. I knew what it meant. They were coming. The tracks were unmistakable. Deep impressions in the softened earth, heavy boots pressing down with purpose, moving steadily toward the cabin. I traced them with a gloved hand, feeling the weight of each step, deliberate, unhurried, confident. Men who thought they owned the world, or at least what they wanted from it. The air smelled of rain and dirt, and the forest stood silent, as if holding its breath. I didn't say anything at first, but the silence between us was thick with meaning. She was in the corner, holding the babies, their small bodies curled tight against her chest. Her eyes met mine, steady but shadowed with a fear she tried not to show. The babies whimpered softly, sensing the tension even if they didn't understand it. I sat beside her, voice low. "They're close." She nodded, her fingers tightening on the thin blanket wrapped around Mara and Ellen. "We have to be ready." The night stretched long, but sleep was a stranger. I checked the windows, inspected the doors, listened for any sound beyond the crackling fire. Outside, the wind whispered secrets among the trees. Somewhere far away, an owl called, answering some unspoken question. We moved through the cabin like ghosts, careful not to wake the girls. Every creak and groan of the old wood felt loud in the quiet. I strapped my rifle, checked the cartridge, made sure the blade was within reach. She busied herself packing what little provisions we had: dried meat, a small loaf of bread, the last jar of sweet cream from town. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, though I saw the hesitation when she glanced at the door, as if weighing the chance we might have to leave it all behind. I wanted to tell her we could run, anywhere but here. But the words stuck in my throat. Running hadn't saved her before, and I'd promised I wouldn't leave her alone. "Whatever comes," I said, voice steady, "we face it together." She looked up, eyes reflecting the firelight. For the first time, I thought I saw something like hope there, fragile, flickering, but alive. Morning came wrapped in grey clouds, heavy with unshed rain. The forest seemed quieter, darker, waiting. We ate in silence, the baby's soft coos and sighs the only sound that dared break the stillness. Then the first knock came, sharp, deliberate, echoing against the wooden walls like a warning. She flinched, clutching the babies tighter. I rose, rifle in hand, and moved to the door. The knocking came again, harder, urgent. My heart beat fast, but my hands were steady. I pulled the door open just enough to see 3 figures standing in the muddy road beyond the gate. The man in front was broad-shouldered, wearing a worn brown coat stained by rain and dust. His eyes were cold, hard as flint. Behind him, 2 others shifted uneasily, their fingers resting on the butts of rifles. "I'm here for what's mine," the man said, voice low and rough like gravel. "You've been keeping her and those girls from their family." I didn't answer. Instead, I stepped fully into the doorway, blocking their view of the cabin behind me. "They're not yours to claim," I said simply. The man spat on the ground, eyes narrowing. "They belong to the bloodline. You took what wasn't yours to take." I clenched my jaw. "She's a person, not property." A tense silence fell. The 2 men behind shifted, hands twitching toward weapons. I tightened my grip on the rifle, ready for what might come. Suddenly, the woman appeared behind me, holding the babies close. She stood tall despite exhaustion and fear, shoulders squared, eyes blazing with a fierce light I hadn't seen before. "They're my daughters," she said, voice steady, "and I choose to keep them safe. With him." The man laughed, cruel and empty. "You think this man will protect you? This stranger who wandered onto our land?" I took a slow step forward, rifle raised but not aimed. "I'm not a stranger to loss. I'm not a stranger to fight." The man's eyes flicked to the rifle, then back to her. "Last warning. Give them up, or there will be blood." I looked at her, her face pale but unyielding. The babies stirred in her arms, tiny fists curling and uncurling. I thought of the promises I'd made without words, the silent vows we'd forged in the cold nights and quiet days. "No," I said, voice steady and clear. "You'll leave. Now." The man's hand hovered near his rifle. The two behind him moved as if to draw theirs. Time slowed. Then, with a sudden sharpness, I fired a warning shot into the air. The sound cracked like thunder, shattering the silence, sending birds flapping into the grey sky. The men froze, eyes wide. The leader spat again and cursed under his breath. "You'll regret this." I kept the rifle trained on them, unblinking. "Try me." After a long moment, the men turned and disappeared down the muddy road, boots splashing through puddles, disappearing into the trees. I closed the door slowly and turned to her. She didn't speak, but the tight grip on the babies loosened slightly. Her eyes met mine, fierce, grateful, and something deeper that neither of us named. That night, I sat near the fire, watching her chest rise and fall as she slept with the babies cradled close. The weight of what we faced pressed down on me, but beneath it something lighter, a fierce determination that no threat could touch. We were no longer two lost souls wandering a forgotten road. We were a family, broken, bruised, but unbroken. And as the fire flickered low and the wind howled outside, I knew one thing for sure. Whatever came next, we would face it, together. The days after that confrontation carried a strange weight. The forest seemed quieter, yet the silence was sharp, like the calm before a storm. Each morning I'd wake before dawn, listening to the world breathe slowly, trying to catch any sound that didn't belong, a twig snapping too close, a shadow that moved against the light. She was growing stronger, slowly reclaiming parts of herself that the harshness of her past had nearly stolen. The babies thrived under her care, little miracles of pink cheeks and fragile fingers, their coos and hiccups filling the cabin with warmth that almost felt like hope. But despite the quiet moments, the threat lingered like a heavy cloud just beyond the ridge. One afternoon, as I chopped wood outside, she approached carrying Mara in one arm, Ellen sleeping lightly against her shoulder. The sun was soft through the pines, casting long shadows across the clearing. Her hair was tied back with a faded ribbon I'd found in town, small acts of normalcy that she clung to like lifelines. "James," she said softly, "we can't stay hidden forever." I paused mid-swing, axe raised. "I know." Her eyes met mine, steady but full of something I couldn't quite name. "They'll come back. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. We need to be ready." I nodded, wiping sweat from my brow. "I've been thinking the same." The truth was, I was already planning how to reinforce the cabin, how to create traps, how to prepare for a fight that might come whether we wanted it or not. But I also thought about running, farther than we'd ever gone before. New land, new faces, maybe even new beginnings. But she shook her head. No more running. That night, the fire between us was a steady glow in the dark. The babies slept wrapped in blankets, their breaths soft and even. We sat in silence, a quiet comfort settling over the room. "I want to tell you about my mother," she said suddenly, voice barely above a whisper. I leaned in, curious. "She was strong," she said, eyes distant. "Not the kind of strength that shows in fights or words, but the kind that keeps you standing when everything wants to break you." She looked at the flames, tracing their movement. "She taught me that even in the darkest times, you can find a way to keep going, to keep hoping." I nodded, feeling the weight of her words sink deep. "Sounds like she left you with a powerful gift." "She did." She smiled faintly, then winced as the memories pulled tight at her chest. "But that gift came with pain too. Pain from knowing that some battles aren't chosen but forced upon you." We fell silent again, the kind of silence that feels full, not empty. Outside, the wind stirred the trees, carrying whispers of distant storms. The next morning, I took the babies out for fresh air while she gathered herbs nearby. I watched Mora's curious eyes dart around, Ellen's sleepy smile, and I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time. Hope. Not naive or foolish, but quiet and steady, like the fire that kept burning in our cabin through endless nights. But the reprieve was short-lived. 2 days later, I spotted fresh tracks again. This time they circled the cabin, careful, calculated. I followed them into the woods, feeling the cold bite into my bones. Whoever came this time wasn't just passing through. They were searching, hunting. That evening, I began reinforcing the cabin, nailing boards over windows, digging shallow pits around the perimeter, sharpening stakes. She helped where she could, her hands trembling but determined. We spoke little, but our shared labor built more than protection. It forged a bond stronger than words. Each nail hammered, each breath taken side by side, stitched us closer together. The babies stirred often that night, sensing the tension. I held them close while she prepared warm tea and mended torn blankets. As dawn broke, a sudden crack in the underbrush made us freeze. I moved to the door, rifle ready. But it was only a lone raven, cawing and circling above before disappearing into the sky. I exhaled, shoulders loosening for the first time in days. Still, the threat was real, and it was coming. She looked at me then, eyes wide but fierce. "Whatever happens, James, thank you for staying." I met her gaze, feeling the weight of everything we'd endured, everything still to come. "We're in this together," I said. "All the way." For the first time, I believed it wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about building something new, a fragile, fierce life born from ashes and whispered promises. And no matter what came next, I knew one thing. We would face it. Together. The days blurred into a tense rhythm. Watch, wait, prepare. Every sound outside the cabin made my heart jump. The snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, the distant howl of a wolf. We moved quietly, speaking less and relying more on the unspoken understanding growing between us. She was no longer just a woman broken by the past. She was fierce, her eyes burning with the will to protect her daughters at all costs. And the babies, tiny as they were, had become the center of our fragile world, the reason we held on to hope. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the pines, casting long shadows, I saw a figure move at the edge of the clearing. My breath caught. The threat was closer than ever. I stepped outside, rifle ready. The figure paused, a man, tired, worn, but with eyes that carried a warning. They were coming back. Back inside, she clutched the babies tight, waiting for the storm that was about to break. The cold crept into my bones as dusk settled over the cabin, the sky a bruised canvas of deep purples and fading reds. The forest around us seemed to hold its breath, every shadow stretching longer, thicker, as if waiting for the inevitable storm to break loose. Inside, the cabin was quiet but taut, like a wound pulled tight, ready to snap. She sat near the fire, Mara and Ellen nestled against her chest, their soft breathing a fragile heartbeat in the room. Her eyes were distant, tracing invisible lines in the flickering flames, but every so often they'd meet mine, fierce, unyielding, yet laced with fear. I wasn't sure how long we could hold this fragile peace. Every night brought the weight of waiting. Every creak of the old would a reminder of what could come crashing through at any moment. I checked the rifle again, my fingers moving over the worn stock, the cold steel barrel, the familiar heft grounding me. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying a scent of rain and pine, and something else, something metallic and bitter that set my nerves on edge. We had fortified the cabin as best we could. Boards over windows, sharpened stakes hidden in the underbrush, traps set to warn or slow down any who dared approach. But I knew it wasn't enough. They were coming for her. For the babies. Her past wasn't a ghost anymore. It was a living, breathing threat, closing in like a pack of wolves. And I wasn't about to let them take what we'd fought so hard to protect. As night fell, I watched her prepare the babies for sleep, humming a low, haunting melody I hadn't heard since my own childhood. The tune wrapped around the room like a spell, a fragile shield against the dark. Then she looked up at me, her eyes shining in the firelight. "James," she whispered, voice trembling, "if they come, if I don't make it, promise me you'll keep them safe." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I promise," I said, voice rough but steady. "I'll never let them go." The hours stretched thin. The babies slept fitfully, stirred by dreams of things they could never understand, their tiny fists clenching and unclenching. She sat beside me, silent but present, the weight of all we'd endured pressing down on us both. And then, in the stillness just before dawn, the first sounds came, muffled voices, heavy footsteps crunching on frost-hardened earth, the distant rattle of weapons. My heart slammed against my ribs as I slipped outside, rifle raised and senses sharp. The cold bit into my skin, but adrenaline burned through me like wildfire. I counted 4 figures moving cautiously through the trees, their breath steaming in the frigid air. They weren't just hunters. They were soldiers of a forgotten claim, men who believed violence was their right and mercy a weakness. I stepped forward, voice low but carrying. "Leave now. There will be no warning next time." They froze, eyes locking onto mine, cold and calculating. One of them spat on the ground. "This ends tonight." I knew then there was no turning back. The fragile peace shattered like glass. I fired a warning shot, the sharp crack echoing through the woods. The men scattered, disappearing into the darkness, but I knew it was only a matter of time. Back inside, she held the babies close, her lips pressed tight. "We need to leave," she said, voice urgent, "before they come back with more." I nodded, heart pounding. "We'll go at first light." But deep down, I knew the fight wasn't just for survival anymore. It was for the right to live, to build something new from the ashes of what had been lost. That night I sat by the fire, watching her sleep, the babies nestled safe against her. I thought about the road that had brought us here, dusty trails, silent nights, the weight of loneliness and the faint flicker of hope. We were broken, bruised, and battered by a world that had no mercy. But together we were strong, and come dawn we would face whatever came next, not as victims, but as something fiercer, as something unstoppable. The first light of dawn broke soft and pale, slipping through the gaps in the cabin walls like a quiet promise. The forest held its breath beneath a thick blanket of mist, the world half asleep and unaware of the storm that was about to unfold. But inside the small, weathered cabin, the air was thick with tension, every second stretched thin between fear and resolve. She moved silently through the room, eyes on the babies nestled in the cradle, their breaths shallow but steady. Mara and Ellen, pink-cheeked and sleeping despite the danger lurking just beyond the trees. Her hands trembled as she smoothed a stray lock of hair from one tiny face, a mother's fierce love shining in her gaze. I packed the last of our meager supplies into a worn leather satchel, dried meat, bandages, a small knife she had sewn into her skirt. I checked my rifle one last time, feeling the cold steel steady in my hands, a harsh contrast to the warmth burning deep inside me. The footsteps had returned overnight, heavier now, closer than ever. I'd heard whispers in the wind, caught shadows moving just out of sight, and knew the final reckoning was upon us. She met my eyes, a question unspoken lingering between us. I nodded. No more running. Not now. This was our stand. We stepped outside into the morning chill. The mist curled around us like a living thing, swallowing sound and light. I took a deep breath and scanned the tree line. There they were, 6 men, faces hard as stone, rifles slung low but ready, eyes cold with intent. Their leader, the man who'd claimed her and the babies as his bloodline, stepped forward, a cruel smile curling beneath a beard flecked with grey. "You shouldn't have come back," he growled. "This ends today." I raised my rifle slowly, voice calm but filled with steel. "Not today. Not while I'm here." The men moved in unison, boots crunching against frost-hardened earth. I fired a warning shot that shattered the stillness, sparks of gunfire flashing through the trees. The world exploded into chaos. Bullets tore through the air, which splintered under fire. The babies cried out in fright. She grabbed them, her arms a shield, her voice fierce and unyielding as she whispered promises of safety. I moved like a shadow, every shot calculated, every breath measured. The men pressed closer, but so did I, a wall between them and the fragile lives trembling in the cabin. A hand grasped my shoulder, a blow that sent me sprawling, but I rose again, fueled by something fiercer than pain. For her. For the girls. For the life we fought to build. The fight dragged on, the forest echoing with shouts and gunfire, until one by one the men fell back, broken and beaten, their threats fading like ghosts. When the last shot rang out, silence settled, heavy, complete. I lowered my rifle, heart pounding, eyes searching the shadows for any sign of return. She stood beside me, weary but unbroken, the babies safe in her arms. We looked at each other, the weight of everything passed between us. Grief, relief, hope. "We made it," she whispered, tears tracing quiet paths down her cheeks. "No," I said, voice rough but steady. "We're just beginning." The road that had once ended in dust and silence was no longer an end at all. It was a turning, a new path carved from pain and resilience, from 2 broken souls who had found strength in each other. Together, we would build a life not defined by fear or loss, but by love and courage. A life where Mara and Ellen could grow without shadows chasing them, where hope was more than a whisper on the wind. As the sun climbed higher, melting the last frost from the pines, I carried the babies inside. She tended to their cries, humming that same quiet song, a lullaby born from the ashes of our past. The fire burned bright, steady and warm, a beacon in the wilderness. And for the first time in a long time, I let myself believe in something beyond survival, in the possibility of peace, of belonging. The road was no longer empty. It was full of promise, and we would walk it together. If you were in his place, would you fight the same battle? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video and explore the other stories waiting for you on the screen.